This story we are about to hear really hit a nerve with me. I'm the daughter of immigrants, and the truth is, there go I, but for the grace of one decision. Fill to capacity. Crazy good stories and timely topics. Podcast for people too stubborn to quit and too creative not to make a difference. Inspiring, irreverent, and informative. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Pat Benincasa, and welcome to Fill to Capacity. Today's episode, The Unshackled Truth of a Willful Soul. Carina Ghionzoli's story. And it's quite a story. Welcome, Carina.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor. Thank you so much.
Well, I've been looking forward to our discussion, and I'd like to give our listeners a little bit of background about you. Carina is an author of the book, The Clank of Chains, a life coach and podcaster for Break Fear, Find Freedom. Carina was born and raised in South Africa, graduated from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa with a Bachelor of Science. Did I say that right, Carina?
It's a Witwatersrand, yes.
I think you say it better. Okay. Now, before I go any further, there's a little bit of confusion I want to clear up. Were you and your son Italian citizens living in South Africa?
No, South African citizens.
Okay.
My mother and her mother and my aunt came from Italy to South Africa to meet my grandfather, who was a prisoner of war in South Africa. So that's how they came to South Africa. So I was first generation.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So Carina came to the U.S. in 2016 and was arrested along with her son Luca in 2018 for overstaying their visa.
Yes.
Carina was in detention for 8.5 months. Luca was released 6 weeks on the condition he returned to Italy, and then he did.
Yes.
So I've got to ask you, when you came to the States, did you intend to be a U.S. citizen?
Yes, I came to the States I was invited to the States by someone I met online. That we spoke for about 2 years, and then he said, well, why don't you come here, and then we'll get married and we'll build a business together. And so I said, well, hey, why not? I thought we had something going on. So that was the reason I came to the States.
Okay, so I want to jump into this right out the gate. And this is a bit awkward because in your interviews, you mentioned that you knew that your visa was expired. And I guess the big question is, Carina, why didn't you renew it? What were your thoughts? And I know you have time now away from everything that happened that might give you some insight, but I guess that's the big question.
Well, and yes, I do. I did know that there was that it had expired. But what had happened is I came to the States on a promise. It turned out to be a lie. So my situation at that moment was I didn't have the resources to actually go and renew my visa.
Okay. Well, now I just want to go back to 2016 when you came over. That was a time in the US where there was this anti-immigration rhetoric that was ugly and escalating. It was a very bleak time. Were you aware of this when you came here?
No, I just no, I just came on like on a fairy tale, really. Like coming on in a fairy tale and having this wonderful life, and maybe finding my prince which really, in reality, afterwards, I realized, hey, the only person who's going to save me is myself, no one else. But at that time, there's the promise of a better life.
Yep, yep. And I think there always comes a point in our lives when we realize there's no prince, there's no aha moment, no job. It has to come from the inside out. I think we
Yes.
all hit the inside out wall at some point in our lives. Well, will you tell us a little bit? You were a life coach and podcaster. Can you tell us about your life up to the arrest so we can get a sense of how you went from day to day?
Well, the podcast I just started, my podcast's only a year and a half. So the podcast I started a few months after my release. Back in South Africa, I was a coach and I ran a cleaning business. And that was just the day to day,
Mhm.
like just doing random work, really,
Yeah.
running business and doing the work.
Okay.
So there wasn't anything major exciting, or it's just day
Just
to day things.
just life.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I want to go to the arrest. Will you please describe your arrest and what happened?
Well, I was in a hotel at the time, and I just, somehow you just feel that something's not right in your life, And the few weeks before that, I was just feeling like something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And that morning, that I just heard a banging on the door. I was still asleep, and I sort of like, sometimes it's far away, and
Yep.
it doesn't really enter your consciousness. And then eventually, it was like, "Hey, open up, police." And then I knew, I just knew. So I went, opened the door, and there were these two men. I mean, I'm not very tall. I'm like 5'1", 5'2", so I'm pretty short. And I'm small, So there were these two huge men at the door, like covering the door. And they had bulletproof vests on, and they were just standing there, and they said, "Well, you know what, you know why we're here." And I said, "Well, yeah, I know why you're here." So I just let them in. I mean, what was I going to do?
Right.
And then, yeah, so it was, you don't really, it doesn't really hit you at that moment about what's just happened. You just go with what's happening at
Yes.
that moment,
Yes.
because it's just such a shock, really, even though, like I said, on some level, because your intuition's screaming at you. So yeah, they came in and said, "Look, okay, we need to go." So I just could take my phone. So I took my phone, got dressed, and because obviously I was wearing pajamas or whatever, and they arrested me. So they handcuffed me, my son, handcuffed me and shackled, and like took us through the place. So it was humiliating as well on a lot of levels, because you like treated like a criminal.
Yes. Yes. And to be shackled and handcuffed and walk
Yeah,
out in that way had to be terrifying.
it was. It
Oh,
was. It
yeah.
was terrifying and humiliating, and you know what? You don't even know what you're feeling. I mean, you don't really know what you're feeling, because it's just like follow. And you have to negotiate how to walk with these things,
With these
downstairs or
manacles?
whatever.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, so they throw you in a van, you and your son, Luca, and then you're emptied out from the van and you're placed in a cell with 8 other women?
Yes, so it was a long process, because they drive through the streets, and so eventually, by the time they process you and whatever, I mean, we got arrested. It was about 7 a.m. and only actually got into the detention. It was about 4 a.m. So it's a long process. They put you in they take you and they put you into a holding cell. So yes, and the holding cell was freezing. It was so cold, and there's just women, a whole lot of women there, yeah, and you just put in, and you don't really know what's going on, and you don't know if these women are. You should know, but you don't. I mean, like, it's jail,
Yeah.
so you don't know if the people are safe. You don't know anything. It's very scary.
Oh, yeah, and you were separated immediately from your son, so he went with
Yes,
the men, you were,
yes,
brought with the female section of the detention. Okay. So here you are, and you're in this situation, and you're cold, all these people. What were the first weeks of detention like for you?
Scary, because first of all, most of it was in Spanish. I'm in California, I started learning Spanish because I thought, well, I need to learn Spanish. But I didn't know much Spanish when I was arrested. So everything was in Spanish. And I mean, you could hear some of the English, but most of the instructions, and that was in Spanish, which was quite interesting. But I was just afraid because I didn't know anybody. I wasn't sure about anybody. And I mean, you should know because it's just immigration, people with immigration problems or whatever. Yeah. So, but it was still very scary. And of course, it's the self-abuse as well. Like that was the worst part, the self-beating. That's what made me go crazy because that was continually in my head, right? Like, why? It was your fault. Why didn't you do it? You
Yes.
knew. Why didn't you do something about it? Now look what you've done. How are you going to get out of this? What about your son? So it was that constant abuse.
And you made that clear in your book. I think that was as heart-wrenching for me to read that as your physical incarceration. During your detention, you're surrounded by Spanish-speaking women. You don't know the protocol or the expectations. You didn't know what was happening with your son. You didn't have a lawyer. How did you cope? How did you do it, Carina? Good Lord.
Well, eventually, the one day after lying, freezing on this bed, on this bunk, eventually one day it was like, you know what, they can imprison me, they can imprison my body, but they can't imprison my mind. So I thought, if I don't get out of this, they're going to win. I have to, beat the system.
Yep.
So it was just a decision I made. Then the mental stuff started. So I just swapped. Instead of beating up, I changed it. It was just like a mindset change, really.
So you changed that voice in your head. Instead of turning on yourself, you stood with yourself.
Yes.
That's a
yes.
huge turn.
Yes. Well, it took a while, but I also was kept very. I can't keep still. I have to either walk. I'm always busy.
Yep.
So I started walking round and round and round and round and round the pod. And then I found things to do. So then I started working. I started cleaning. I started helping people. I started doing all sorts of things because the days were very long. I had never felt such long days in my life.
So let me ask you, as you were doing all this, I was amazed that you kept journals in detention. Now, how were you able to do that? Did the guards know?
Well, I'd just go and say, look, I need some paper and pen. So they gave me a paper and a pen because, eventually, one of my philosophies is you treat people the way you want to be treated, right?
Yes.
And if you're kind to people and you're loving and you're honest and you just, you just get it back because that's just like how life is. So I made friends with the guards, friends, and so like they gave me paper, and then eventually when I started working, I bought books. I bought, you can buy stuff commissary, so I bought books. Yes, so I kept journals. Okay. That was one of my saviors.
So they paid you a low wage when you cleaned and you did things. So you saved that money up, and then you go to the commissary and buy notebooks and pens and things that you needed.
Yes, you get paid $1 a day to clean, to work.
Oh my God. Okay. In your book, you really show how you are going through levels of trauma, trying to make sense of things, looking at your surroundings. And it made me wonder, in order to survive, what did you have to let go of? Or what had to die in you for you to become free?
My self-abuse, my self-flagellation. Mm-hmm. So I had to throw, that was the first step, to throw that whip away, mm-hmm. Like we've all got that metaphorical whip. I had to throw it away, and I had to realize that it wasn't about me. It's about other people. So, I was so self-absorbed that I became afraid.
Yeah.
Whereas if you put it out there and you start helping people, you take that fear and you put it on you take self-absorption, you put it on someone else, everything shifts as well.
Yeah. Yeah. When we pull ourselves out of ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. There was a nice passage in your book that you wrote, quote, I am in detention and my mind, body, and soul are in prison. My body and mind are pushed into this box and I am watching them die. When we watch and listen to ourselves, we see our beliefs shine through. What beliefs did you discover? And did you even know you had them?
Possibly the belief that took me into this whole story in the first place was the belief of a wonderful love story, I suppose, that you can have this wonderful love. That belief's not dead, because I still believe it.
Sure.
Like, you still believe in the wonderful love story. But it was also about the beliefs. It's just, there's so many beliefs about how you are not important. The other person's always more important than you. And all those kind of things. And you don't deserve things. The other person always deserves more things. So it's always about self-worth, self-love.
And do you
Yeah.
think, if I could add a gender component to this, that as women, we're raised to always make sure that the people around us are cared for and to put their needs ahead of our own? But you
Yes.
were slammed into a reality, an alternate world where if you play by those rules of, yes, let me be the caretaker. No, no, none for me. Thank you. No, I don't need anything. You're in a world that could probably eat you up and spit you out with that mindset.
Yes. Yes, of course. Of course. And you've got to break those rules within yourself very, very quickly. But of course it's difficult. I mean, I'm Italian. Like, I'm brought Italian, brought up Catholic. Like, those are the things you do. I mean, you put yourself behind, at the back all the time. Everyone else is more important than you. You have to take care of everybody. You've got to nurture everybody. And you don't nurture yourself. That's not okay. That's not allowed. So that was a difficult one to break. And it always comes up.
You know, when you say that, I'm a first generation American. My parents were born in Italy. And so we're speaking Italian woman to Italian woman. Okay. And it's encoded in our DNA.
Yes.
Everything
Yes.
you said, that of course you take care of other people first. And if you have to do without, you do without, but you make sure that everyone is cared for. Everyone has what they need. But
Yes.
what's really interesting in that story, the caretaking, loving person that always takes care of other people, what I marveled at is that you transferred that loving, caretaking person to take care of yourself. You were the
Yes.
object of that care and that love.
Yes.
That was a big thing.
That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yes, it is. Because, and I don't even think it's so much even Italian women. I think it's women in general
Yeah.
have to learn. I mean, women, people, I think, let's not even, they have to learn that, because
Yep.
we taught, but especially, so yes, it was huge.
I think you're right. It applies to women all over and other people. It's just that every ethnicity has their own package or version of that.
Yes.
And so,
Yes. It's so interesting.
isn't it? And so, as Italian women, we have our own brand of that. So,
Yes.
I think one of the extraordinary things about your detention was that you had multiple things constantly coming at you. And I think, as you said, the biggest thing was this guilt with the voices in your head, and also trying to calm down, being terrified, trying to calm yourself down. And then just a human being adjusting to being locked up and told what to do 24/7. And then you had a
Yes.
cancer diagnosis. And then in your book, a large portion of your book, you're in there not knowing what your legal situation really is and saying, well, you're going to court today and no preview, no coaching, no nothing. There you go. How were you able to get beyond the physical, psychological, and emotional chains of your confinement?
One step at a time, really. Yeah.
That's important. So you were able to maybe, instead of taking it as multiple things coming at you, somewhere you were able to say, okay, one thing at a time, one thing.
It's about just this. One thing I really learned there was living in the moment. That was all that mattered. It was just this moment and then the next moment and the next moment, because I couldn't think further than that. There was just too much happening. There was just too much. So that's how it was. So it was just the present moment, the present moment, the present moment.
And you know what's amazing about that? That's true whether you're in prison or not, in any situation in life, is to be in present time, to be in the
Yes.
moment. Because
Yes.
once we
Yes.
start going down the path of our past, whoa, all of a sudden the what ifs come back. And then
Yes.
if you go in the future, anxiety just skyrockets because it's the unknown. So really, when you think about it, Carina, the best place to be is in the moment.
Yes, of course. Just enjoying this conversation right now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
So you wrote, I went in as one person, I came out as another. So how did you come out? What person did you become?
I went in scared. I came out confident. I came out knowing that I could do anything because I survived that.
Mm-hmm.
I beat this. I won anyway. I won it in some form and in some odd way on my own terms.
Yeah, you did. You turned a situation and made it your own. You know,
Yes.
you can stand being against yourself, or you can stand being with yourself.
Yes.
And somewhere you made a deal to be with yourself, that the two of you, yourself and Carina, were in this together,
Yes.
and that
Yes.
empowered you.
Yes. You know what? You know that you're never alone. It's
Well,
just
yeah.
it's a knowing that, and that was another thing. It was a knowing that even though I was alone, I was never alone.
And do you feel, can I ask, are you a spiritual person? Do you have a faith? Do you have a belief system?
I'm a spiritual person, yes. I'm not a religious person.
Yeah.
We won't go into the religion part. That's another story for another time. But yes, I'm a spiritual person. I've always been, another part of me, I'm a healer, so I do hands-on healing and I work with energy. That's also part of my coaching. So my coaching is very eclectic. I bring in a lot of spirituality within the coaching as well, because you have to. We all as one, and you can't just pick pieces. It has to be a holistic approach.
Yes. And then that we are connected. We are all connected, all
Yes,
things in the universe. We are part of this continuum of connectivity.
yes,
Okay. And so
yes,
that your spiritual self was able to help you get a handle and calm down and just deal with present moment.
yes, yes. I mean, it took a while. It took about a month or so, but eventually, slowly it comes together.
Yeah. So how did you get released? What happened?
You should be reading my book, but I'll tell you.
Well,
Um,
I did read your book. I don't want to interfere because that book is marvelous. If you could
Thank you.
just maybe give us something that doesn't reveal the book. I don't want to put you on the spot. I apologize.
No, it's not. Well, I got, I've said it on another podcast anyway. I think I've said it on my podcast. I got diagnosed with stage 3 melanoma, which is a dire. I mean, like everyone knows, it's a dire diagnosis. So I received the diagnosis the one day, and the next day I was released.
Really?
Obviously, and for me that was also a blessing. That was a gift from God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, because there was no ways that I could have been released. It was just no ways. So be careful what you wish for.
Also, the irony here that something like a cancer would be, I'm going to say the gift word, and I'm saying it very carefully. In your case, that diagnosis of cancer was a gift.
Yes, it was. It was a gift. It was a gift.
And I also think that anybody, like a lot, a lot of people could have looked at that like, I'm incarcerated and now I get cancer. I mean, how did you just not feel sorry for yourself and just implode? Karina, how did you do that?
I don't know. It was almost like it was out there. It wasn't in here.
Okay.
It was, but I think maybe on some level I knew that it was the way it had to be. That was the only way that the story I could come out of this story, because there was no other way.
Yeah. So you left the Otay Mesa Detention Center in San Diego with the clothes you had and a dead cell phone with a charger, and you're back in the world. What was your transition like? To come out of that back into the world?
Well, first of all, and I had a bag of all my journals as well. That's what I also had. But when I stepped out of I understood when I stepped out of the van pulls up and opens the door and says, "Okay, get out now, bye." And it's like, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
And this is also in my book, but like, I understood the feeling of prisoners who have been in prison for so long, because I felt like turning around and say, "Hey, no, don't leave me. I want to go back."
Yeah.
Because it was like I wasn't safe anymore. I was in, and it was midnight. I was in the middle of on close to the border. I wasn't sure if I was going to get back to. I was going to have a lift or anything to get wherever I was going to go. Didn't even know where I was going to go.
Yeah.
So it was scary.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't even imagine how disorienting it would be
Yes, yes,
because you just left an environment that 24/7, every minute you were watched or planned for. And
yes.
now they let you out at midnight. Did they give you any money at all?
No, no, no. You just go out. So, like I said,
Oh,
I had a tracksuit or whatever, like,
yeah.
because that's my cell phone that was dead, and there was no ways, because I had the wrong charger. They'd given me that, anyway. That was another story, and in my book, in my journals. So I was just, so yes, it was scary.
Wow. Would you call yourself resilient?
I would, right? Yeah, resilience a good word.
Can you tell us what your life is like now? Like, where do you live? Have you applied for citizenship? Do you want to stay here?
Yes, of course. This is my home now. I live in Oceanside, in a little, I mean, I live in paradise, right?
Mm,
I just live in paradise. I'm not far from the ocean. I'm not far from the beach. And everybody's I've just met such
yeah.
beautiful people, helpful. And it's just growing and growing, really growing, and just being alive and loving life. So I'm still working on all those other things.
Okay. Oh, that's good. So you've had months away from that situation, and sometimes we can see things differently or with clarity on something that was very traumatic. And looking back on all that happened, is there any insight about all that that you'd like to share?
Possibly the only thing that I can think of now off the top of my head is listen to your intuition. So if your intuition's screaming at you, it's screaming at you for a reason. However, even then, and I mean, this sounds really ridiculous, but the whole experience was actually a blessing in disguise
Yeah.
because it's made my life richer. I made a lot of friends in detention, and I learned sisterhood. I learned how you can have good friendship with someone, like you can be connected on a platonic, I mean, not any romantic or anything, but you can be connected to another soul that's totally different to you.
Yeah.
And you can trust each other because trust is always trust is difficult. So it's quite interesting that there were a lot of things that came out of it. So, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but because everything was a blessing, and I choose to see it as that because
Yeah.
it's also given me a deeper sense to be able to connect with people on a deeper level as well, and it helps the coaching.
Oh, I imagine it would. To
Yes,
experience all that you went through must have opened channels of awareness and feelings that normally any of us not challenged like that might not discover.
yes, yes.
And you had sort of the concentrated version of all of that for 8.5 months.
Right, yes.
Well, Karina, your story is amazing. And thank you for sharing it.
Thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
Your story is just so incredible. If Dante were writing the Inferno today, he would add a 10th ring of hell and call it the circle of paralyzing fears.
Yes,
And that
yes.
how some people can go through a trauma or loss in paralyzing fear and still keep their heart intact is truly remarkable. And your story is remarkable.
Thank you.
Just
Thank you.
incredible.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Pat. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure this podcast is going to touch a lot of people.
That'll be good.
So thank you. And listeners, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe and tell your friends about Fill to Capacity. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you. Bye bye.